Looking forward to your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to dial, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, I'm very disappointed that I thought the first question would be on cricket. If you were watching the cricket today, what a day for England. But it's not on cricket. Harry is in Waltham Forest. Tell us what you want to ask, Harry.
Good evening. Good evening, panel. The question is that given the French government appears to be turning a blind eye to the cross-channel illegal trafficking people, why isn't the French government in the dock for aiding and abetting the people traffickers?
How do you draw the conclusion that they're aiding and abetting them?
Well, they appear to be turning a blind eye to the traffic, given that some 10,000 have come across since the beginning of the year. 60,000 so far, I understand, in total.
OK, James Sunderland.
Well, it's a fair question, but one of the things that we're not completely exposed to in the UK is the fact that the French authorities are making a difference. So the British government has spent a lot of money in supporting the French government, turn these migrants around, and it is a fact of life that the French government has actually stopped the majority of crossings. It's the ones that slip through that the ones we're dealing with.
Stop. Why do you say the majority of crossings? Somebody on the programme last night, I can't remember who, said that they'd stopped 45% of the crossings. That's not the message that the government is giving us. They're basically saying they're stopping very few.
Well, I mean, the figures are varying depending who you talk to. I had a good briefing last week from the Home Office, and what came as a surprise to me, the French authorities have been vilified in the press. They've been given a very hard time because of the money that it's costing, but they're making a difference. But of course, they can't cover the totality of all of the beaches all of the time, and clearly, once these boats cross that median line in the channel, they become a British responsibility, and we take that seriously.
But the argument also is that, and I saw something about this yesterday, that the French Navy ships are still accompanying boats to the halfway line and then leaving them to the British.
Well, I've not heard that. And, I think that it depends which prism you look through in terms of that particular answer. But all I can tell you is that it is a British responsibility at the point at which they get to the halfway line. We know that these boats are still slipping through. We know there's a problem. We know they're coming across to UK shores, and therefore we have to pick up the tab and deal with it when they arrive.
Francis O'Grady.
I think if we really wanted to tackle the people smugglers, then we'd provide safe routes, safe and legal routes for people to be able to claim asylum. And I think most people in this country care about doing the decent thing. And we've got people who are fleeing persecution, war, torture, rape. Mums and dads, children who want to be reunited. And it seems to me that the decent thing to do would be to respect the international laws that we're signed up to, that came about after the Second World War and the Holocaust and all the horror of that, and the importance of every country taking its responsibility to provide the right for people to claim asylum and do that in a way that gives people dignity. I think, for example, that all our experiences is that asylum seekers would like the right to work. They want to contribute. They want to raise a family.
Ukrainian asylum seekers are being given the right to work.
Well, exactly, but not all, are they? So, in fact, it's been very hard for a number of Ukrainian people to come to this country, let alone from Syria, from Afghanistan, and many other countries where people are experiencing horrors. And I think most people in this country have big hearts. And we've seen that through the Ukrainian crisis. And safe routes would stop. That would be the best way to.
But the government say that why is it that people who are trying to come to this country via Calais, why haven't they stopped in one of the countries that they've travelled through on the way?
But as you know, Iain, international law provides.
I'm just saying what the government say.
Exactly. But what we're signed up to as a country is that UN convention that does give people the right to seek asylum here if they want to, because it's very, very often about families reuniting. And I think it's hard for most of us to imagine the experiences that people are going through, but most of us have enough empathy to know that it's the right thing to do, that when families want to be together.
Well, you say most of us know that, and I think over Ukraine, I think you'd be right on that. But is that the same here? And is there some sort of racial element to this, where people seem perfectly happy to have as many Ukrainians come here as want to come, but don't seem happy to have Afghans and Syrians come here?
Well, I think ministers have to answer the question as to why there is different treatment for asylum seekers from different countries, and why that may appear to be, certainly seems to be the case, that Ukrainians, for example, you can come and work here. That wasn't a right that was offered to others. But we have seen safe routes used before for different countries, and I think it's worked, and we should do that now if we really, really want to break that business model.
Eshaan?
I think it's absolutely hilarious and embarrassing that as a state we're arguing over people who choose to take an unsafe route, and somehow they seem to be more dangerous. The fact that people are choosing to take unsafe routes suggests to me that there's a real desperation to doing that. And here we are arguing about the nitty-gritty, and they're splitting hairs about safe routes and unsafe routes. At its core, there seems to be a lack of consistency, and there seems to be a lack of humanity. Seems to have created this two-tier system between certain types of refugees. If you're a Syrian refugee who's been waiting, or an Eritrean refugee who's been waiting 2-3 years for a decision about your refugee status in the UK, and you've gone through the legal routes, and then you see a Ukrainian person walk in to a house a Ukrainian scheme, and they have somewhere to stay for 6 months and so, you'd be thinking there, what is going on? What is the difference between me and this person? And people, I've seen so many debates on Twitter. Look, I'm here as a comedian, so I don't have the data to hand. All I can do is as an observer of how we behave towards people. To me, something is a bit wrong. It seems like certain refugees are preferred over others, and I don't want to pray oppression top trumps. That's what I'm here to do. But suddenly it feels like that's what we're doing. We're saying, actually, the oppression that the Ukrainians are facing seems to be significantly worse, so that we as a country then decide that these are the people we want to treat in this way.
Do you think it's something to do with the immediacy of the Ukrainian war, and that a lot of the people that are coming here from other countries now, whether it's Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, the problems in their countries have been there for a long time, so we're sort of almost immune to them?
But I think there's an immunity thing, but the problems in those countries are arguably our creation. Ultimately, the things that happen in Afghanistan, and the things that the weapons that we sell, the people that we get into bed with, there's lots of other socioeconomic, geopolitical things that I'm not going to discuss here, but Britain has a lot to answer for as to why those people are choosing to come to this country. I'm from an Asian background, dad's Pakistani, mum's Bangladeshi. The reason my parents migrated to this country absolutely has to do with the fact that England made themselves very welcome in countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. By the way, countries that didn't exist in 1947, and these new countries existed, these borders got created, and the whole principle of being a refugee or an immigrant, I still think makes me feel a bit icky, actually, because borders are entirely man-made, and now we've decided that actually we're going to make these rules for these people, but not these people. And it makes me feel very uncomfortable in terms of the humanity that we want to extend to the world, for Britain to be the kind of nation that we're proud of. And at the moment, I'm not very proud to be a British person at all, just given the way that we've dealt with
Juliet.
Well, I think that this country does have a huge amount of compassion for refugees, as we've seen with Ukraine, and as we've seen with the Hong Kong scheme, and as we saw before with a Syrian scheme, which took people from the region who were in refugee camps and assessed them and brought them over in family units. What I think people have a problem with is the sense of an uncontrolled flow of people who we don't actually know who they are, or where they're going, or where they've passed through. And there's an assumption in this conversation that all of these people are refugees. The fact is we actually have no idea. Some of them, I'm sure, are refugees, and some of them probably aren't refugees. And I think that it's fine to talk about safe and legal routes, but the point is that this while there is a limit on the number of people that this country can take, with accounting for social cohesion, and the resources available, then there is going to be an incentive for people to land on the shores of this country and either then go into the system that way or disappear. And the whole point of the Rwanda scheme is to remove the incentive. It's not to actually send thousands of people to Rwanda. The whole point is to stop the crossings. And I don't see how that you can.
Sorry, Juliet, but you're not going to do that by sending 500 people each year. That is a fraction. If you said everybody who comes across the channel will go to Rwanda, I mean, I wouldn't agree with that, but it would be. There's some logic to that.
That is the in theory the aim of the scheme. There's a question as to the government's competence and capacity to do it. But the principle of saying we do not think this is an acceptable situation for 25,000 people a year who we have no idea who they are, who are often, travelling alone, not in family units, who haven't been assessed, often have no paperwork to arrive on the shores of this country.
I mean,
I don't think
paperwork is a tricky thing to pick up when bombs flying around.
Yes, which is why the whole system doesn't work, because you can't say to people, produce your paperwork, right? So then you have to enter them into a system where there's an appeals process, which is right, and and it has to be done properly. But there isn't an efficient way to do that when you have a strong incentive for thousands of people arriving every year.
They had toys for the children in the airports. They processed people when they arrived. They understood that when you're facing...
Sorry, I missed the start. You said the UK or Europe.
Ireland. Mm-hmm. France takes twice as many refugees as us. Germany takes 3 times.
But this is the systems you're talking about are examples of systems where there is an organised process where people where we find out who people are and what their circumstances are, and then they are allowed to go into the system.
Okay,
when Germany and Sweden had a situation where thousands of people were just arriving, that wasn't sustainable, and they rightly said that we have to reassess this.
But what is the logic of sending people to a country which we take refugees from? Rwanda, people from Rwanda come here seeking refugee status.
We don't take, on a blanket level, take refugees from Rwanda. We assess their situation. If they have been persecuted in Rwanda, then yes, we accept them.
But you're happy to send people to Rwanda, to a country that persecutes people?
Well, no. I mean, I would rather that no one made an illegal crossing and then that no one was sent to Rwanda.
No one wants anyone to make an illegal crossing.
But the point is that when people come here from Rwanda who have been persecuted, then that's when we accept them. We say it's not as if
how can we be sure
that
that people go there aren't going to be persecuted? I mean, if you're a gay refugee, for example, I'm not sure Rwanda is possibly the best place to send you.
And this is part of, the deal that the UK has struck with Rwanda is to process, is to keep people in humane conditions and to assess them,
so then,
and to assess them there.
May I just say, therefore, the insinuation is that because we don't have the systems here, and with the numbers that we're talking about, there's a Eurocentricity to the numbers we quote. Turkey has 3.7 million refugees, Pakistan 1.4 million, Uganda 1.2 million, Sudan 1.1 million. Therefore, we're saying that those countries have better systems in place, have better controls in place than the United Kingdom, and we want to present ourselves as a state on the global stage that other people look to and say, yeah, that's the way a country should be run. And I've listed off, Iran's got just under 1 million, Lebanon, 950,000 refugees hosted by the end of 2018. And we're splitting hairs about the 10 or maybe 20,000 who might have taken a boat, and we're thinking, at no point does anybody sit back to think, they're on a boat in a dinghy with their family. At the very least, whether it's France or whether it's the UK, there should be a global response. I don't think it should just fall on the UK. But at some point, we should have enough humanity to be able to say, let's sort this out properly, but while they're here, extend the humanity to them to be able to deal with the situation properly.
Just as a point of information, 2 asylum seekers who were going to be on this flight to Rwanda, which is due to leave at 9:30 this evening, they have been told that they won't be on that flight. So it looks as if there will be fewer than 5 people on this flight. I mean, whatever your view on it, it is a farce.
That's farcical.
Right, we will continue with your calls in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
My name's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
19 minutes past 8 on LBC. There are 2 anniversaries today which you might like to ask our panel about. It's 40 years since the Argentinians surrendered 2 British forces on the Falklands. I think that's possibly worthy of a question. The Grenfell Tower disaster happened 5 years today as well. We were talking to the former Labour MP Emma Dent-Coad a little bit earlier. There's been a service at Grenfell Tower today which we've been covering this afternoon on LBC. But lots of other subjects that you might want to phone in and ask our panel about. We have Francis O'Grady, General Secretary of the TUC here, James Sunderland, Conservative MP for Bracknell, Eshaan Akhbar, comedian and podcaster, and Juliet Samuel, Telegraph columnist. Now, these 4 podcasts, I discovered you on a podcast, on Jeff Norcott's,
right?
What most people think podcast. Yeah. What's your main podcast? Which is the one you'd like our listeners to listen to?
I would like you all to listen to my business podcast, 929.
Because you used to be a banker, didn't you?
I used to be a banker. I've worked in government policy.
That's not rhyming slang.
No, it's not. So I've done various things with my life. But yeah, have a listen to my 929. Have a listen to Have a Word. Have a Word is a hilarious podcast. It's really, really fun, and I'm very proud to be involved with it. So have a listen to that.
Okay.
There'll be some off-colour things being said on that.
Excellent. That's what we like. Right, next question from Steve in Bexhill. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Ian. Great listener. Many moons. Listen, right, the cost of living in this country, right, is getting rife. But the thing is, what we need to do is the people, what I want to speak to the panel, hello panel, is
hello.
we need to not use these people that are coming over on boats, but farms are losing so much money. Vegetable farms are losing so much money. No one can pick their fruit and veg, yeah? Why can't we just get them picking the fruit and veg, right, while we settle their claims? Yeah, and they can earn a living, and we can get taxes from them.
OK, Steve, thank you very much for that. Well, we did discuss the government's white paper on food strategy last night on the programme for an hour. We'll come to James on that because he's working at DEFRA now with George Eustace. Eshaan, do you want to start on this one?
Well, some people might tell you never know who's going to come here. There might be a refugee who comes here and goes on a farm and decides he wants to use some of the pesticide to make a bomb. You don't know that, do you? This is the thing. I think it's
You mean fertiliser, not pesticides.
I can't.
I don't want to give people tips, but
hot off the press. But there's the thing. I actually think it's a lovely idea. To be fair, is that extending that sympathy and working with these people in the circumstances that they're in. Sure, some people might fall through the cracks and try to abuse the system, of course, but we can't possibly make our policy based on how the minority might behave. Surely we can't be doing that, can we?
I think a lot of policies are based on that, actually, and in if you look in policing in particular and crime and justice, you do have to sometimes make laws on how the minority might behave.
Law maybe, but not policy. Law, absolutely. I don't think everyone's a murderer, but of course you've got to have laws to stop people murdering one another. But that said, when the basis of something is they are trying to seek asylum or they're trying to better their life or whatever it might be, we should be able to extend some sympathy and some kindness. Start from a position of kindness and see where you end up, is all I'm asking for, really.
Juliet, that makes sense, doesn't it? If we can have Ukrainians working in the economy, why can't we have other people working in the economy while their claims are being settled?
Well, I think there's a difference as to how people have arrived here, right? Because the people arriving on boats, we know have arrived illegally through, a route that is run by people traffickers. If people have arrived here in another way and made an asylum claim, I think that's quite different, and I don't see why those people shouldn't be allowed to.
But we know
work.
that 75% of them will have their claims approved. So on that basis, surely you could say, well, we might as well have them working in the economy, given that we have so many shortages in different sectors of the economy already.
Well, we don't actually know exactly. We don't actually know exactly how many people disappear into the economy before they've even entered the system. So, 75% of those who enter the system maybe have their claims approved. But the whole point of this policy is not to disincentivize the boats crossing the channel, because that's the starting point for all of this. Is we don't want people to cross the channel on boats. We want people to come here and claim asylum in a regular way where they can enter the system, ideally with their family or bring their family later. But we don't want to.
Way of doing it.
In Syria there are safe routes set up in refugee camps where people's claims were assessed. There's a safe route for Ukrainians
to come. It's not for Iranians or Afghanistan. The point is that they have come through maybe 5-10 countries on the way to this country to claim asylum. If they're coming over a land route and then going through the ocean, there are ample opportunities for them to claim asylum in a safe country as they go along. There is a legal route that they have bypassed. But if you speak English and you've got family here, you naturally want to come here.
Yeah, you may want to, but this is why the point of the scheme is to change incentives.
When you're being bombed out of your home, what you really want to do is look at admin. What you really want to do is to make sure that you've got the legal routes absolutely nailed on, lest there be any trouble going down forward. It doesn't matter that your village has been completely ransacked. It doesn't matter that your children may have died. That doesn't matter, because the first thing is for you to get onto your phone.
I don't think people are not being bombed as they pass through Europe on trains or in lorries on their way to smuggling operations on the coast.
But on that
then
basis,
bring them over.
On that basis, every single asylum seeker coming from all of those different countries would settle in Greece or Turkey. Now, I mean, that isn't fair, is it? Surely we've got to take our fair share of people, given, some would argue, given what Eshaan said about Britain's role in a lot of these conflicts.
We should, I agree. We should take our fair share of people. I would rather we took more people from Ukraine. I would rather we'd taken more people from Syria. I do not think that the way for us to take people is to see whoever can get here on a boat run by, some kind of criminal gang and then say, you are the guys who we're going to take. What we should do is we should increase the number of people we take in other ways that make more sense.
Okay. Francis. Let's concentrate on the labour shortages.
Steve made a really good point, which is that at the moment, people who are desperate, who do manage to get here, who shouldn't be punished because those boats are run by criminal gangs. You shouldn't be punishing the victims for that. You should be supporting the victims of that and people seeking asylum. But that while that's being processed, all asylum seekers say they want the chance to contribute. They want to be able to make a home and make a better life and be part of the community. And exactly as Steve says, at a time when we've got massive skills shortages, and by the way, Steve, I wouldn't just be talking about farms. Again, when you meet asylum seekers, so many of them may be journalists, they may be teachers, they may be engineers, it's from all walks of life. And it seems to me that if we can find a way to convert those skills and give people the opportunity to earn some money.
Because we shouldn't run away with the impression that everybody who is a so-called illegal asylum seeker, in inverted commas, is somebody who is sort of at the bottom end of the skills scale.
On the contrary,
you've got
because
doctors,
of course many journalists, trade unionists also face persecution.
I would like to ask you, both of you, but I may be wrong, but I think
James,
whether you are okay with the situation in which the boats are flowing over the channel. And maybe you are, and that's a consistent position.
Well,
if you are not,
that's why I said.
If you're not, if you're not, then you have to say,
a safe route, just like other countries.
But there is not going to be a safe route for everyone who wants to come. There just isn't. There's not going to be a situation where we say we are going to accept 5 million refugees, over the next few years. That's not going to happen.
Right, James wants to come in.
At last. Thank you, Ian. Just to get back to the caller, Steve, I empathise with your view, actually, and you raise a very persuasive point. In my constituency, Bracknell, we've got near full employment. You talk to employers locally, I've got farms to the south of the constituency of Finch Hampstead. They cannot get enough staff. We haven't got enough people working. Yes, the quota's been increased this week from 30 to 40,000 people that can come here and work with visas and work permits, but we need an awful lot more. So my view is that we have to leverage...
But you're in government now, you can make this happen.
And I'm pushing very hard for it to happen, because ultimately this isn't about quotas, this is about getting enough people into the workforce that can help the country to create wealth. And by creating wealth, we can afford to pay for fantastic public services. The answer specifically regarding asylum seekers is they need to be processed fairly and quickly. We need to know who they are. The checks do need to happen. But once they're granted asylum, once they're given their right to stay, let's use these people. They bring fantastic skills with them. But if we can't get enough people through that route, and of course, we do need to make sure that we do stop these illegal crossings because they are unsafe routes. Let's get people into the country that can contribute to the economy, and let's get the workforce working.
But why not allow them to work before they've been approved? Given that 75% do get approval anyway, wouldn't it make sense, given that we have all these labour shortages, and even if they are doctors, nurses, whatever, before they're approved, they might have to do jobs which are much lower skill than they're capable of doing, but surely that is just common sense.
Yeah, look, I haven't got a definitive answer. I need to ask the Home Office on what their reason is, but I imagine that there is a need to make sure that the people are who they say they are. There could be a security implication. We need to make sure that we know why they're here. But ultimately, once they're processed and once they're given that right to stay, we should be getting as much out of these people as we can, because they bring skills with them, and there is a need for people to work in this country.
Juliet?
Well, I disagree in the sense that I think if you have entered the asylum system, I think you should be allowed to work while your claim is processed. What I disagree with is doing nothing to address the incentives to get on a boat and cross the channel.
100%.
Well, you have to then tackle the root causes, and that's a much bigger question of war, of climate change, of persecution, human rights.
The UK does have the biggest aid budget in the world by proportion of GDP to try and tackle this. But I do think, and yes, we should be trying to, and we are, but we're not going to
at the moment who
solve all of the world's problems.
And we are one of the richest.
The UK did not. For example,
I want to move on. We spent half an hour on two different aspects of this subject. Let's move on to something else in just a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Andy Ivey.
An Iraqi man has won a last-minute injunction from the European Court of Human Rights, stopping him from being flown from the UK to Rwanda on the first flight under the government's controversial relocation policy. 5 other men lost challenges earlier at the High Court in London and the Supreme Court. The plane is yet to take off. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have attended a service at Grenfell Tower in memory of the 72 men, women and children who died in a fire there 5 years ago. The royal couple laid a wreath and heard speeches which included calls for the arrest of those responsible for the tragedy in West London. An MP who made an unwanted sexual advance on a teenage member of staff faces a 2-day suspension from the House of Commons. Patrick Grady of the SNP says he's profoundly sorry for his behaviour after being found to have breached Parliament's sexual misconduct policy. LBC weather dry tonight with clear spells. Tomorrow sunny across most of England and Wales. Some showers elsewhere. Highs of 27 degrees.
LBC.
Fever Tree.
With Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33 on LBC. Francis O'Grady is here, General Secretary of the TUC. James Sunderland, Conservative MP for Bracknell. Eshaan Akhbar, comedian and podcaster, and the Telegraph columnist Juliet Samuel. Now, this Saturday, Francis, you've been trying to basically persuade me to go on your march.
Not just you, Ian.
Not just me, no, but that would be an important part of it, obviously.
Obviously, you can help carry the banner.
To go on this march, what's it all about?
So, thousands of people will be gathering together in Portland Place in London by midday on Saturday, marching to Parliament Square, saying we demand better, because I think people have had it up to here in terms of the cost of living crisis. We've heard today real wages down on this time last year, on average £26 a week in real terms. People are really struggling with prices going through.
How does a march affect any of that?
We want to send a really clear message that we're fed up with workers being expected to pay the price, that people need a pay rise, and they need decent employment rights too. You know, the Prime Minister promised us 20 times, the government, on 20 separate occasions, that we would have stronger rights at work to keep pace with what's happening, because we've had fire and rehire, we've had the spread of 0 hours contracts, we've had P&O, the absolutely shameful episode in our history of industrial relations in this country. And, you know, enough is enough. People want action, and we've been promised those employment rights. Where are they? Why aren't we getting to grips with the fact there are millions?
Francis is looking at James the whole time she's saying this.
But I was in Worksop last night in Nottinghamshire, talking. Yeah, I get all the glamour jobs. The brilliant people talking to workers at B&Q, at the bakeries, care workers, and the common thread to all of them was that there is no fat left to trim. You know, there are teachers talking about kids going into school who are saving half their school dinner to take home because they don't know whether they're going to get tea that night. You know, We're talking about an absolute epidemic.
So if people want to come on the march,
standards.
they just turn up. You have to register or anything.
Oh no, you don't have to register, Ian. We'll recognise you, and like I say, you can help carry the banner.
I'm busy on Saturday. I've told you.
But this is going to be even more fun because it's a real family affair as well. It's for everybody who wants action, and we've been promised it. Where is that action from the government?
Well, we've got a sort of slightly related question here from Khaled in Wimbledon. Khaled, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Yeah, against the background of economic uncertainty with the cost of living crisis, rising inflation and utility bills and all that, the Bank of England is still indicating to financial markets that they're going to increase interest rates quite significantly through the rest of the year. And my question, therefore, is are we headed for a hard landing? Because this week's economic data was quite weak.
Well, Juliet, you write about economics a lot. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I feel quite bleak about the prospects for the economy because I think we've only got the start of the inflation shock that's still to come through. There's still a lot to come through. Food prices, for example, which are a huge part of people's outgoings. The energy price shock has probably got more to come, and then there's going to be a massive increase in the cap, the energy price cap in the autumn. There's talk of rationing energy for possibly for industrial users, which will probably lead to a rise in unemployment. And I don't see, and then you've got the Bank of England, the need for the Bank of England to raise rates, which they're probably not doing fast enough to abate some of this inflation and to stop a spiral from taking off and making the situation even worse. But of course, if and when they do catch up and raise rates higher, that's going to hit costs across the whole economy. Everyone who has a debt is going to just see their costs rise massively. So, I think it's a pretty bleak picture. I do think we're headed for a recession. I think there's a slightly limited amount the government can do. They could probably support more households who, poorer households, and they probably will have to again in the winter, is my guess. But a lot of these shocks are not within the government's control.
The reason this is different from the inflation crisis of the 1970s is because it's a global thing, isn't it? It's largely about the lack of supply. So therefore, if there's a lack of supply and the demand's still there, prices go up. And this is happening in loads of other countries. So there's a limit to what the government can do, and yet people expect the government to help in these circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, what the government can try to do is to support poorer households, to get through it. To be honest, though, what they could have done is if they hadn't spent the last 20 years faffing about not having an energy policy and actually building a bunch of nuclear power plants and changing the incentives of the gas market so that we don't have this crazy system where everything is priced at the most expensive gas in the system, and also exploiting the North Sea and exploiting shale, then we wouldn't be in this situation. So there was a lot the government could have done. Right now, anything it can do will take at least a few years.
James Sunderland, well, you represent a fairly leafy constituency, quite a well-to-do constituency at any rate. What's your postback telling you?
A lot of things at the moment. What I would say to you is, as a politician, I would love to be able to support everybody that writes to me and all those across the UK that are in need. That's not possible. We're £2.2 trillion in debt. The inflation crisis currently is a global crisis caused for a variety of reasons. And ultimately, of course, we want to help everybody at all. I'm pretty satisfied right now that the Chancellor's doing what he can to help. Package of measures announced last week, I think, was quite radical, quite supportive. I agree that there's more that needs to be done. Tax could come down in terms of VAT and certain products. I think that there's more we can do to subsidise the poorest houses. So I'm not immune at all to the need to do an awful lot more. But there are macro conditions here that the government can't necessarily solve. I am concerned about interest rates going up, although that's, in terms of monetary policy, sensible. It's likely to bring inflation down, and it needs to come down. Of course, we then disincentivise those who want to borrow for business purposes. We sort of stifle economic growth. So finding the fine line here between too much government action and too little is very, very different. And ultimately, I empathise massively with all those that write to me and give me their issues.
Doesn't put bread on the table, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. But again, the government's doing what it can to help. We've got the energy subsidy at the moment. Universal credit's doing what it can. It's not the panacea, I get that. We also had an awful lot of money spent keeping people's jobs going, livelihoods. The government was very generous during the pandemic. The economy was in a pretty good place relatively when we left the pandemic, when it left behind us. We were, and still may be, one of the fastest growing countries in the G7. So the government hasn't got it wrong. Well, indeed. Well, the projections
We're going to be the lowest in the G20.
This is the thing. The projections are quite worrying. So what the Prime Minister, number 10, Chancellor, does now is really, really important. And what we need to be doing, Ian, is we need to be learning from past lessons, that we don't spend our way out of the problem. We don't.
Well, that's exactly what we are doing, though. I mean, it's what we did in the pandemic. It's what the Chancellor has been doing ever since he's been Chancellor. And yet Francis will tell us that he hasn't spent enough.
Well, I think we've had 12 years of real wages falling, and that was based on austerity. It was based on refusing to improve workers' rights and level up the bargaining table.
George Osborne was sitting in that very seat earlier this evening.
Well,
we've also had years of low inflation.
Conservative chancellors across the last decade and more have failed to get us into a better position, because I think hiding behind the skirts of the global energy crisis isn't good enough. Other countries and other families in other countries were in a better position to face this crisis, because wages were rising in those countries after the global financial crash. They haven't been rising in real terms here.
Well,
in fact,
to be accurate, they were, but had only just got back to 2008 levels when the pandemic hit.
Well, and now we are facing real wage cuts, a shrinking economy, and projected to be only better than Russia in the OECD projections on GDP growth. So,
and they're busy.
They're being hit by sanctions, so that is nothing to be proud of. Where is the government's industrial strategy? Why did it take so long to introduce the windfall tax that the TUC called for back in October, and the government still doesn't want to call a windfall tax on greedy energy
8 months
companies?
is quite quick for government.
Again, I mean, the left loves to blame the government.
As we had on furlough, when the trade union movement stepped up, came up with that proposition around furlough, and the government did listen. Ever since, we've had a kind of back to business as usual, get back in your box, let's pick a fight with the unions and blame them for everything.
What, like strikes?
Let's
go on strike.
A whole series of, why do you understand why those workers that the Transport Secretary described as heroes during the pandemic for getting key workers into their jobs and for moving freight around the country, who are now facing a real struggle with household bills? Do you understand why they might democratically vote to withdraw their labour?
We're all in this together. It's a collective responsibility to do what we have to do as a country to pull us out of it. I'm confident
we will. Bring us around the table and let's try and get an agreement.
People, some very good brains in number 10 and in the Treasury doing some fantastic work right now. I dread the thought of a Labour government being in power right now.
Let's start with tackling soaring levels of child poverty in this country, which shame us all.
Let's start by going to Eshaan. He can give us a solution to all
this. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm having spent 6 years in the city, and now my life as a comedian, you can imagine my parents really trust my judgment on anything. So I wonder how anybody else does. Ultimately, again, let's just go back. I observe the world around me. Do people feel at the moment that they are getting bang for their buck? Are they living the life that they want to be able to live? Is it harder to just live every day? And the answer is yes. Now, of course, we can say that there's a lot of global shocks to the economy that may be beyond the control of a particular incumbent government at any one particular time. Absolutely, I concede that point. But fundamentally, this goes back to the kind of nation state that we want to be. Have we been thinking about the future of this country? I get it. We've had the pandemic. We've got this war going on in Ukraine, so there has to be a degree of short-termism. But maybe there's a bigger conversation about how long governments are in power for. But there never seems to be a consistent... We do too much politicking. There never seems to be this idea of saying, over the next 20, 30, 40 years, for the country, irrespective of whether we have a Labour or a Conservative government, for the country, this is what we should be aspiring to be doing. And the method to get to that point may differ, but ultimately the purpose of why we exist is to make sure that subsequent generations are able to have a better life and be able to improve. And I'm lucky that I'm in one of those positions where I can, but I don't know whether, if I were to have children or beyond, whether their life would be better than mine. And that surely is a concern.
That's an interesting point, because we did have essentially about 30 years, I'd say between 1980 and 2010, where you had Conservative and Labour governments effectively following similar. There was a broad
100%.
consensus, wasn't there?
Yeah.
But because of the financial crash, things changed.
Yeah.
And then we went back to the 70s with Jeremy Corbyn as opposition leader, and then there was this great divide. And a lot of people actually think that's a good thing, because you knock on someone's door and they say, well, there's no difference between the parties, why should we bother voting? And when Corbyn was leader, there was a choice between the two parties.
I think it's even deeper than that. You know, if you think there used to be a broad consensus around everything from asylum seekers to social insurance, decent sick pay, you know, proper protection when you became unemployed, income related. That was the kind of thing that had a consensus right across the political spectrum, and that has been shattered.
Yeah.
And I think we need to try and build back a social consensus.
Build back better. That's what we need to do, isn't it?
I just want some reality in addition to the slogans.
I can recall the 70s, I can recall Winter of Discontent as a kid, I can recall the early 80s as well. The UK has come a long way since then. Living standards have gone up. The quality of life has gone up. For the vast majority in the UK. And what I would say to you, we've got more people in work today than ever before. This is not a bad place to be. We knock the UK, we knock what the government's not doing. But actually, if it was so bad, people wouldn't be seeking to come.
You know, if you take city bonuses out, that real living standards are
We've got to
falling
move on,
behind
Francis, but
inflation.
just this text from Andrew and Ealing I've got to read out. As usual, you journalists don't even know what inflation is. Inflation is too much currency in circulation, and it's got nothing to do with the supply chain. It's too much money being printed. Get it right, please. Well, I think we're both right, because you are absolutely right on that.
Yeah.
Too much money was printed.
But that doesn't include price inflation.
No, but there is also, there are various different types of inflation. And what we've got at the moment is almost a perfect storm, haven't we? Where you've got all this money that was printed over the past 10 years and then these supply chain issues. So I maintain that I was right, but you're right too, Andrew.
Can I just say...
No, you can't. 8:40.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Foreign Secretary Liz Truss joins me now. Deportation plans for people back to Rwanda. Senior members of the Church of England say that this is something that shames us as a nation. Are you part of a government that shames the nation?
I don't agree with that assessment at all. We are carrying out this policy to deal with the appalling people trafficking.
Cost of the flight to be somewhere in the region of £350,000 to £400,000. Is that value for money, Foreign Secretary?
Fundamentally, we need to break the business model, and this is why we have to take this action.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
10 to 9, Francis O'Grady, James Sunderland, Eshaan Akhbar and Juliet Samuel with me taking your calls and texts. Andrea in Kensington says, 5 years after fire ripped through Grenfell Tower in West London, an inquiry has laid bare the string of failures. 72 people died. Why are they still waiting for justice? Francis.
Do you know, I was thinking I was at an event with Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham about Hillsborough. And the echoes are so clear that ultimately, for me anyway, it feels like ordinary working people resident in Grenfell were valued less. There was a string of disasters, from privatisation to deregulation to, I remember after the South London fire in 2013, the coroner actually said we need to
Bracknell House, was that?
We need to tighten building regulations, and ministers said that would be a burden on business. We've had companies who put profit over people. We've, a council.
But there is, it seems to me, a rigorous inquiry going on. So I completely understand the frustration of people that it has been 5 years. But from what I can see, and I've talked to our correspondent Rachel Venables, who follows this literally on a daily basis, it is a rigorous inquiry, and we will get to the truth.
I agree we'll get the truth. Will we get the justice? Because one of the things that's been laid bare is that fragmentation of responsibility, the buck passing that has gone on with everybody washing their hands. And, it was criminal. And yet I can't see anybody ending up in the dock because of this currently. It seems like yet again, it's like P&O and all the rest of it, yet again, the villains get away with it and they price it in, and people have lost their lives. There were lessons that could and should have been learned, that we shouldn't talk about all regulation as red tape and a burden on business. This is about protecting people's safety and, in this case, their lives. And I think government needs to step up and take responsibility for its part in running a system that allowed that to happen.
OK, Eshaan.
I love our fascination with inquiries. We love an inquiry. I can't wait till, if I ever have children and Charles says to me, can I have this McDonald's? I said, let me hold an inquiry for you and then let's see. Inquiries seem to delay all this.
As parent, you're judge and jury.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite. So there's that. But also, if you're one of the 72 Grenfell victims, families or families or friends, and you're listening to this, it seems like you're going to get more attention if you suddenly become a Ukrainian refugee. Like, it just seems like the attention that these people should be getting, should have received up to this point, it goes back to the care, kindness and compassion that we afford citizens either of our own country or people who appear onto these shores. There is a lack of kindness and empathy that has been afforded to people for a very long time in the UK, and that makes me a little bit embarrassed. And I've said it already before, Grenfell is yet another example of this. And I don't know whether it's because they were poor, I don't know whether it's because they're predominantly ethnic minority, I don't know whether it's because we just don't care. People don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, but something's amiss. I don't know if the same thing would have happened if there was an apartment block in Mayfair that burnt down, or an apartment block in Canary Wharf that burnt down. Would we have waited this long to get an answer as to why that happened?
That's a good question, isn't it, actually, James Sunderland?
I was watching Newsnight last night, and I watched that documentary, and I will freely admit that the shivers went through me. It was a difficult watch, and my heart goes out to all of the families. In fact, there was one lady interviewed who was talking about the difference between the family next door, who were told to stay put, and they died, and the family in the next door flat who saw smoke in the room and they left. I mean, this is ghastly, absolutely ghastly. I'm a parent, we're all parents, families. I mean, this is pretty horrific stuff. What I would say to you is that the UK is not shy of getting to the truth. The UK is not shy of bringing people to justice. And what I would say to you is that when the inquiry is completed and we've got the facts and we've got the evidence, it is clear that prosecutions need to follow.
OK.
Well, that
Francis?
includes ministers holding up their hands, because one other thing that I found really, really hard to stomach was that there was an attempt to blame the very people who ran towards the fire when everybody else was running away, and that was firefighters and the control staff, who themselves, yet again, had warned after that 2013 fire that they were challenging the stay put policy. They obviously weren't equipped to deal with a fire that in a block that was illegally clad with inflammable materials, but they had also raised questions about the stay put policy, and yet there seemed to be, in my view, an orchestrated attempt to blame firefighters by people who are not fit to lace their boots, frankly.
Okay.
I agree.
So,
I mean, if I may, Ian, very quickly.
Very quickly.
What happened was a terrible accident. And I think that we do need to get to the truth and make the appropriate finding. But it was a terrible accident. Accidents do happen, but we have to get to the truth.
Accident of our own making.
Well, yes, indeed.
Okay.
We have to get to the truth and then deal with it.
Right. Ruby in Cleethorpes, and I need 30, 45-second answers on this one. Nick Ferrari asked Liz Truss this morning if the Falklands War was the last virtuous war we've had, referencing chaotic scenes from the Afghanistan evacuation. She didn't really answer. How would the panel answer? Juliet?
I think maybe until the war in Ukraine, that was true. Not that we are direct combatants, but as supporters.
Eshaan?
Pretty much agree, but I don't know what war is really that virtuous, really, ultimately.
I think standing up to dictators and a flagrant breach of international law and invasion is virtuous, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but then that suggests that we, as a nation, have never breached international law ourselves.
No, we've been hypocrites.
We just do it in specific and limited ways.
Oh, right, okay.
James Sunderland.
Yeah, I mean, Falklands is a pretty clear cut. It was an act of unprovoked and
You were in the armed
aggression.
forces.
I was in the armed forces, served in the Falklands, not in 82, since then, twice. So I know the place quite well. But the important thing for me is that there was an act of aggression. Margaret Thatcher made the right decision, sending British forces down there. We retook the islands. And, of course, the garrison that's there today is a continuing vindication of the fact that we support the islanders and their right to self-determination. And rightly so.
Francis?
Can I make a different point as a trade unionist, which is that lots of veterans from the services work in our fire service, the railways. I think ministers sometimes forget that, the prison service. Very often they come into civilian life having experienced pretty awful traumas. They don't get the mental health support they need. They don't get the housing. They don't get the retraining and support. Unions can help them, and I really hope they join us on Saturday.
Which didn't answer the question. Virtuous war since the Falklands.
For me, I'm not a pacifist. I do believe there can be just wars, but it's a bit like people voting for strikes. It's always the last resort, and people don't do it lightly. You've got to have tried every other avenue and try to negotiate.
Well, I'm going to name Kosovo, Sierra Leone, and I would make an argument for Afghanistan, but we haven't got time, so I won't. Not the way we left, though. That wasn't virtuous. No. Final text from Jake in Southampton to lighten the mood a bit. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill looks likely to get number one in the charts this week. Which song from the past deserves a revival? Oh, I can think of so many. Miss Unites, Cliff Richard, definitely. Eshaan?
Wake Me Up Before You Go.
Juliet?
It'd have to be something from David Bowie, but I'm not sure they've gone away. Maybe Ashes to Ashes.
Francis?
Sam Cooke, A Change Is Gonna Come.
Don't know that one. James?
The first single I ever bought, Don't Stop Me Now by Queen.
Okay.
Shall I admit what the first single I ever bought was?
Yes, please.
Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool by Little Jimmy Osmond. We like to, Eshaan, this is your first appearance. We like to end the programme on a high note, and that was it.
What a lovely note that is, yeah, very good.
Thank you all very much indeed. Francis O'Grady, James Sunderland, Eshaan Akhbar and Juliet Samuel. Coming up in a moment, we're going to continue our discussion on Rwanda and the fact that this plane is supposedly going to leave the airport in Wiltshire In about half an hour, we'll cross to our reporter Matthew Thompson, who I assume is still there waiting for that to happen, and we'll get your views on whether the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Church of England are right when they say this is a shameful episode for our country. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's still unclear how many asylum seekers will be on board the government's first deportation flight to Rwanda. It's due to take off from an RAF base in Wiltshire. In a last-minute ruling, the European Court of Human Rights has confirmed that at least one man, an Iraqi national, can't be forcibly removed from Britain tonight, and it's understood another